Howdy sports fans here, good. If you've ever felt let down by a new game, we know how you feel. We've been through this pain time and time again. You've been waiting for that next big, highly anticipated game for years. It finally releases and then BAM! You're just filled with kind of disappointment. It doesn't necessarily mean that the game in question is bad though, just that it didn't live up to the hype of the marketing, previous games, or quality expected from its development team. Following on from the disappointing release of Cyberpunk 2077, we're going to look at some of the other soul-destroyingly disappointing games to ever grace the gaming world. Also, to reiterate, we aren't saying that these games are bad, well some of them are, just that they were disappointing, they may have disappointed just their core fanbase, or maybe they just upset pretty much everyone. These games may also be good nowadays, like in the case of a certain game about space that Cyberpunk may have to take some cues from. Also, just to be clear, there's no ranking system at play here when it comes to discussing the most disappointing games. Because how do you rank exactly how disappointing something is? By how much it reminds you of when Burger King burgers look absolutely nothing like their adverts? Exactly, doesn't make sense. 1. Shenmue 3. Blimey, where to start? Right, so that game that came out back in 1999, yep, the one that was supposed to have 12, yes, 12 entries into its series. Yep, the one that had a cliffhanger ending at the end of the second game and didn't follow up. Well, in 2019, that cliffhanger was resolved and we finally got Shenmue 3. We wish Ryo had stayed hanging. Shenmue 3 features the same style of gameplay from those first two games, which were 20 years ago, and you can kinda see where its problem started. Now, I don't think there are many gamers who have an issue with developers keeping a style of gameplay going for the sake of nostalgia, but those games were designed at a time that most controllers only had one analog stick, making for a difficult and awkward experience. Shenmue was also a semi-open world game, not common at the time, so we can excuse some of its issues. But with games like Yakuza mimicking Shenmue's gameplay and building upon it to make it a fluid experience for modern gaming, Shenmue 3 immediately felt dated and old. What's worse, the developers seemingly assumed that they'd be continuing with this 12 game long epic, and Shenmue 3 didn't even wrap up the story. Instead we got yet another cliffhanger. Thanks, but I'm not waiting around until 2038 for Shenmue 4. 2. Aliens Colonial Marines. It's hard to find much information on the early versions of Aliens Colonial Marines. Googling only really brings up information on the Gearbox-led development of the game, which in turn led to its 2013 release. The actual game had been in development much longer, and many recall seeing screenshots of an early pre-Gearbox version of the game. Unseen 64, however, gives us a look into this cancelled PlayStation 2 title that was a collaboration between Fox Interactive and Electronic Arts. While many may argue it doesn't have anything to do with the latter Gearbox title, we should point out that both games had storylines set around the same time frame, which was in between the second and third movies, and also featured a plot of Colonial Marines investigating the missing Sulaco spaceship. While Colonial Marines 2001 was cancelled, it certainly whetted the appetite of Aliens fans the world over, and many of us waited patiently for news of a new game. This was met when Gearbox announced they were working on the game, but seemed to shift their focus to the Borderlands franchise, with Gearbox outsourcing development to Timegate Studios. Rest in peace. When we finally received the game, it was a fresh mess. Fresh in the sense of a freshly laid mound of cow shit. The game was rushed, really broken, and maybe worst of all, incredibly boring. Quite hilariously, the broken AI was later found to be a typo in the game's code, which just goes to show the lack of love afforded to the game, leading to it becoming a huge letdown and a common find in bargain bins around the world not long after release. 3. Duke Nukem Forever. Let's face it, while the good Duke fancied himself as a funny yet mature first-person shooter for adults, it was in fact fodder for prepubescent teenage boys. The overly macho Duke Nukem himself killing aliens and rescuing babes was, to be honest, pretty standard fare for the 90s. While it's easy to mock it now, Duke Nukem 3D was a solid game. Then dropped the Duke Nukem Forever trailer in 2001, and in all fairness, it was one of the best video game trailers ever seen. In fact, it's just as impressive today, over 20 years later. But despite the impressive trailer making Duke Nukem Forever look outstanding, it's important to remember that DNF was originally stated as releasing no later than mid-1998. Oh god. One of the key reasons that Duke Nukem Forever was in development for so long was down to the sudden increase in FPS technology. 3D Realms co-owner George Broussard wanted DNF to be groundbreaking. But with the likes of Valve pushing the boundaries of what FPS games could be with Half-Life and its sequel in 1998 and 2004 respectively, the DNF development team were always on the back foot. After working on the game for years, parts of the game engine needed to be rewritten in 2002, leading to around 95% of previous level design work needing to be scrapped. But Broussard still claimed the game was 2 years away. 2 years later, the team swapped to the Doom 3 engine. Eventually, publisher Take-Two, holders of the Duke Nukem publishing rights, filed a breach of contract lawsuit against 3D Realms for failing to produce the game. Things got messy, and we'd eventually get DNF from Gearbox and 2K Games. Was it worth the wait? Well, only if you enjoyed dated FPS gameplay, casual sexism, and drawing with your own poo-poo. 15 years of development for this. Really? 4. No Man's Sky. There's really little that can be said about No Man's Sky release at this point. It was the poster boy for disappointment way back in 2016. In fact, No Man's Sky started trending around the release of Cyberpunk due to how many people were reminded of the early disaster. Hello Games, previously known for the pioneering Joe Danger franchise, decided to try something a little more ambitious and created a crafting and exploration game with some survival elements. According to Hello Games, the game would feature millions of procedurally generated worlds alongside generated creatures, factions, co-op play and huge space battles. Some wondered if it was promising too much. Spoiler, dear viewer, it was! Hello Games' co-founder Sean Murray stoked the fires of excitement as he went full Molyneux, never go full Peter Molyneux please, and over-promised the features that No Man's Sky was offering on day one. It didn't help that the excitement of the scope that No Man's Sky was offering got serious media traction, and suddenly Murray was all over the TV schedules promoting his game. When NMS was released, it worked, but was lacking many of the promised features, and also didn't look as good as its pre-release trailers. Within a few days, two players found themselves in the same place in the galaxy, but couldn't see one another. Space battles and factions didn't exist, and the game was panned by critics and fans alike. In Hello Games' defense, they went quiet after release and focused on updates. Fast forward to today, and No Man's Sky is one of the best crafting and exploration games available. It's not disappointing many people these days, but still, maybe don't lie next time, Sean, mate, eh? People tend to not like those lies. They're not keen on them. 5. SimCity, or should that be SimShitty? SimCity was a landmark city building game first released in 1989 that saw a sequel in SimCity 2000 4 years later. However, while further sequels were good, they didn't provide as much of a technical leap as the second game did to the original. Each new title progressed the series ever so slightly, so it was understandable that Maxis wanted to take a break from the SimCity series following 2003's SimCity 4. It would take a decade for another full-fledged SimCity game to arrive, and it would eventually come in 2013's reboot of sorts, SimCity. Maxis, with their lineage of creating Sims games, some good and some not so great, were expected to knock it out the park with their once genre-defining series. Trailers previewed familiar gameplay but with a modern twist, and SimCity was shaping up to regain the crown of the king of the city builders. For years, city building fans had to put up with cheap knockoffs such as Cities XL and City Life. This game could not fail. But pride comes before a fall, and few games have fallen quicker or harder than SimCity. For a start, the game was always online, and publisher EA claimed the game was built to work online and simply wouldn't function offline. Now do let me know if you see the big twist coming here. One whole week later, an offline fan patch was released and the game still worked fine. Servers failed to account for the amount of players at launch, and SimCity was rendered unplayable for many. Those who could play found that the maps were significantly smaller than SimCity 4, possibly even smaller than the 1989 original. Save game corruption was the cherry on top of the poop cake that was SimCity. We haven't touched the game since its 2013 release, but then again, we didn't have to, as Paradox published Cities Skylines in 2015, a SimCity spiritual successor and a superior game in almost every way. 6. Watch Dogs. We seem to fall for it every time, don't we? Gameplay, graphics, and just overall presentation that look too good to be real, too smooth to be an actual game. You all know what I'm talking about, that infamous E3 gameplay video which allowed Ubisoft to show off Watch Dogs' next-gen graphics, while also displaying its silky smooth gameplay, seamlessly hacking into people's phones, causing car accidents by hacking traffic lights, and so on. It looked seriously cool, and even the cynical shits that we are were swayed by it. When the game was released 2 years later, things didn't look right. The graphics had been seriously downgraded, still impressive, but not what they'd shown 2 years prior. Bizarrely, despite the obvious differences, Ubisoft refuted claims that the graphics had been changed at all. Also, while the game wasn't bad, it just wasn't overly fun to play. It was a standard, if a little dull, open world adventure with hacking, another feature which wasn't particularly innovative or smooth to perform. We vividly recall spending way too much time standing in a car park hacking CCTV cameras for some reason? Video games. Bizarrely, modders later discovered Watch Dogs' advanced graphical features hidden away in the PC version of the game. Activating these allowed players to play the game looking like it did right back in 2012, thus proving that Ubisoft had downgraded the graphics, but then decided to lie about it. Ubisoft later clarified that a downgrade had happened, and this was due to Watch Dogs entering development before knowing the full hardware capabilities of the 8th generation of consoles, leading to a downgrade when Watch Dogs just couldn't run in its previewed state. These days, Watch Dogs is ultimately just a safe, average open world franchise. It boggles the mind that it's not a much more adventurous series with at least one universally beloved release considering, all the cool hacking and stuff, but oh well. 7. Silent Hill Homecoming. Many Silent Hill fans found the release of the 4th game in the series subtitled The Room to be a disappointment, following on from the superb trilogy. While The Room wasn't on par with what came before, it is still a good game, one that fits into the Silent Hill canon well, and brings a lot of fresh ideas to the table. Most fans will now point at Silent Hill Homecoming as the biggest disappointment in the series, not because it's the worst game of them all, but as it's the biggest sign of the franchise's failing fortunes. Following on from Silent Hill 4, Konami elected to outsource the development of future Silent Hill games to outside of its native Japan. While the future looked promising for the series after the first outsourced title, the PSP's Silent Hill Origins received generally good reviews. Fans were intrigued to see what the future held for their beloved franchise. Homecoming would be the next release, and despite some positive reviews, it didn't hit home with the series' fanbase. The protagonist was no longer an everyman, but a cliché-troubled war veteran, one who could handle himself against Silent Hill's otherworldly demons. While the overall presentation was fine and Akira Yamaoka's score was a welcome addition, the overall gameplay just didn't sit well with the fanbase. Many Silent Hill fans see Homecoming as the beginning of the end of the grand franchise, with following releases in the series being met with either ambivalence or sheer derision. These days, I think it's safe to say that Silent Hill fans will do pretty much anything for a new Silent Hill game that isn't also a giant gambling machine. 8. Metal Gear Solid 2. Wait, please don't hurt us, please hear us out here. MGS2 is one of the most beloved games of all time, and rightly so, but there's something about it that, if released today, would have sent the internet utterly insane and likely led to an actual real life purge, probably. While Metal Gear Solid may have actually been the third canon game in the series, the mainstream wasn't really aware of the games that came before it. While it was a big hit in its native Japan, it wouldn't be until Metal Gear Solid on the PS1 that the series would enter the mainstream consciousness, and boy would it enter. Seemingly overnight, MGS spearheaded the popularity of the stealth game, a genre that existed before but hadn't had a hit as big as this. The series would lay the groundwork for the likes of Hitman, Splinter Cell and Assassin's Creed, but in the 90s fans hungered for a sequel. An epic movie-style trailer was released for the PlayStation 2 sequel and featured on various PlayStation demo discs. Never before had video games looked so cinematic, and we got to see lots of Solid Snake doing this thing in the trailer and various pre-release material. Imagine the surprise of MGS fans when they finally got their hands on Metal Gear Solid 2 and realised that Solid Snake barely features in the game at all. Instead, players are handed control of newcomer Raiden. Fans were pretty disappointed that they weren't playing as the character they all loved and had previously assumed would be the lead protagonist. MGS2 is still a very good game, but one that left a slightly sour taste in some fans' mouths. Let's just say that if this game had released in 2021 instead of 2001, it would have made the controversies around The Last of Us Part 2 look like absolute baby stuff in comparison. 9. Mighty Number 9. It seems that Capcom did its best to forget about their little blue guy for the last 2 decades. While the core series may be up to its 11th entry, only 3 of those games have come in the last 2 decades. Fans were eager for more following on from Mega Man 10 in 2010, and despite being modestly pleased with Mega Man 9 and 10, no sequel seemed to be forthcoming, and fans assumed that their favourite overlooked mascot had finally been forgotten. So you can imagine Mega Man fans' delight when long-serving series mainstay Keiji Inafune announced a spiritual successor to Mega Man, which would later be successfully crowdfunded. He'd started out as an artist on the very first Mega Man game before becoming a producer on Mega Man 8 in 1996. He'd go on to produce several well-received Mega Man games, including the much-lauded Mega Man Legends. Then you can also imagine Mega Man fans when they finally got their hands on that successor and found out it was just bad. Yes, the modern 3D graphics with 2D platforming mixture just didn't sit well with fans of the 2D classic games. On top of that, fans had become upset with continual delays, poor communication with the developers, and in some cases broken game codes. Also, to rub salt in the wounds, it seemed that Capcom had taken note of the excitement surrounding Mighty No. 9, as Mega Man 11 was released in 2018 to acclaim. Mighty No. 9, meanwhile, is pretty much just forgotten about, like an anime fan on prom night. 10. Cyberpunk 2077. Yep, you were all waiting for this, it's the biggie. Cyberpunk 2077. We could leave it there and we're sure you'd all totally understand, but let's dig in. It's been 84 years, or it feels as much, since CD Projekt Red announced Cyberpunk 2077 in that spectacular trailer with the future lady with the stabby arms being shot by police. Even though we didn't see anything of the game itself, everyone seemed excited. That's understandable, as CD Projekt Red's projects had been improving with each release of their core franchise, The Witcher. The hype build for Cyberpunk was slow and very laboured, but boy did it get more and more exciting with each glimpse of new information. Then we got the Keanu Reeves announcement, and who doesn't love Alex from the Lake House, am I right? Then the delays came, and while they were annoying, they just seemed to build the hype more and more. Cyberpunk was always going to struggle to live up to the freight train of hype that was rumbling towards players. But boy oh boy, who'd have predicted that it'd fall so hard on its augmented face. Following its much delayed launch late last year, Cyberpunk was met with many bugs, some quite basic, some frankly hilarious, such as vanishing clothes. It even had more serious bugs, such as save games being corrupted, if you dare to craft too much. A system that's also kind of broken because there is absolutely no point in doing it, and you have to make a build specifically towards doing it, at which point you've already completed the story. Why? It was also very poorly optimised, which while many are confident that CD Projekt Red will fix over the course of the next year, many more say that it shouldn't have been released in this state at all. The city feels flat and uninteresting, and the lack of AI for many of the generic NPCs makes the whole city feel false. GTA 5 created what felt like a living, breathing city, and that was released 7 years ago. While it's still very easy to have a lot of fun in Cyberpunk despite, everything, it's not hard to think what might have been if they had waited just a little bit longer rather than pushing it out for those Christmas fat stacks. They're going to fix it over the course of 2021, but still. And that was our list for the most disappointing games ever made. Wow, that was a lot longer than I thought it would be. What disappointed you the most? Be sure to let us know down in the comments below, and thank you for watching.